First of all, let me say it's a pleasure to be here in this beautiful area and to see the amazing things that CADRRE have done, and to be in the company of both the people here, all the people doing such amazing things, and also the other international visitors. Today I'm going to talk to you about one particular project where we have been following about 200 children referred for possible autism at age 2 who are now just turning 30 years old. And what I'd like to do is just tell you a little bit about the journeys that we have seen in these young people and their families and what we've learned from this. I do need to say I do get royalties from the diagnostic instruments when they're used in a project or a clinic in which I'm involved. These are given to a charity in Chicago which provides wraparound services. I'm not trying to sell you anything today and not actually talking about those instruments. And I do have funding from a variety of sources, and no one besides me is responsible for what I'm saying. So I wanted to start with just the idea, which I think we probably all share, that autism is a neurobiological disorder of learning and processing. It's a developmental disorder, and by that we mean that it is different at different ages. A 2-year-old with autism is not the same thing as a 9-year-old with autism, nor a 20-year-old with autism, and also that having autism affects development. A child who doesn't look at people as easily, doesn't smile as easily or smile at people as easily, doesn't understand what other people are saying, and can't talk, elicits different reactions from other people, which in turn mean that that child grows up in a different world than his brothers or sisters or other kids who don't have these difficulties. Their environment is different because we talk to a child who can't talk in a different way than we talk to a child who's talking. We talk to a child who's not looking at us in a different way than we talk to a child who's trying desperately to get our attention. I think the good thing about this is this gives us opportunities to intervene. It gives us opportunities through schools like CADRRE to change this because we can create the environments in which kids can learn better. And I've put this slide up because the girl on the right is a girl who has autism, many sensory specificities. She doesn't like to be touched, she doesn't like noises, she doesn't like certain feelings, but she was lucky enough to grow up in a family with 3 sisters, a wonderful mother, and an incredibly supportive father. And they just took her everywhere. And this is an example where they got her in a life jacket, in a bouncy boat, and she is smiling and happy. And not only that, she could ride horses. One time she flew an airplane. I mean, crazy things. But this was because her family wanted her to do this and figured out ways to make this easier. It wasn't just that they tossed her in, but they figured out ways to help her be able to have these experiences in a positive way. And I think that comes back to the initial statements about independence. So why do we care about changes over time and developmental pathways or trajectories? Well, one thing is we would like to predict what is ahead. We would like to know what's most likely to happen. And we can never tell for sure, but at least if we have some idea, we can make better plans. Secondly, we want to pick what we intervene about. There are so many things that all kids need to learn and ways they need to change. We could do so many different things. And part of it is figuring out if a problem is going to go away on its own, maybe we shouldn't spend a lot of time on it. Or if something is very unlikely to change, perhaps we don't want to devote most of our effort to that. On the other hand, if something is pretty easy to change and it can have consequences that cascade from that, like the girl being able to do things with her family, then those may be things that we want to do instead of other things. And I think the third thing is knowing when to intervene. Sometimes we can push things too soon, like trying to toilet train a child who is just not ready. And we need to know when are the most likely times that things are going to work. In addition, because autism is a neurobiological disorder, if we can collect this information in a way that the people who study biology can relate these individual differences to biological differences, we may in the end have better ways of treating and understanding what's going on. Okay. So the study I'm going to talk to you about is a study that we did in 2 places, in North Carolina at the TEACH program, so across the state of North Carolina, which at that time, 20 years ago, was often quite rural, little tiny towns, people living way out in the middle of nowhere, as well as people living in cities, and then in Chicago, both in the city and in suburbs. And what we were trying to do was have multiple ways of looking at kids, both through hearing their parents talk about them, filling out many, many questionnaires, and also observing the kids, using things like the ADOS or standardized tests. We started with 192 kids who actually consisted of every child under age 3 referred either to the TEACH program during a certain period of time in North Carolina or to a clinic at University of Chicago. And we were able to see all these kids because the minute we got the referral, we called the family and said, "We will see you next week. We will come to your house to do the interviews, then see you in the clinic for free." And everybody actually agreed to this. We also had 21 children who had never had any suspicion of autism, but also had developmental delays, referred by the same physicians who referred the kids who might have autism. And this just gives you a little sense of, by the time these kids were 9, we had seen them at 2 years old, seen them face to face, 2, 3, some at 4, 5 years old, 9 years old, and we also saw them at 14, 19, 21, 25, and now at 30. But at 9, you can see that we've gone down from the original 192 referrals to 170. This sample was about a third Caucasian, a third Black or African American, and 2/3 Caucasian. It was mostly boys with some girls, and this just shows you the average age when we started was under 2.5. At age 9, just to show you what these numbers mean, the North Carolina kids were actually 10, and the Chicago kids were closer to 8, and that was just because of when we were able to see them with the money. And then this sample is a sample with many kids who have significant intellectual disabilities. So your average IQ is 100, so their mean verbal IQ at age 9 was in the 50s for both groups, and their mean nonverbal IQ was between 60 and 75. But if you look at the standard deviation, so the numbers in parentheses, you'll see there's a huge range. So we had kids whose IQs were 20, and we had kids whose IQs were 130 or 140. I'm going to show you a number of figures because I confess I like graphs, but I'm also going to show you videos so you'll have a sense of what these people are really like. This is a graph of changes in the ADOS calibrated severity score over time. That score ranges from 0 to 10, and all it does is reflect how many and how severe were autistic symptoms during a 40-minute standardized assessment with a clinician. So this is not severity in life. It's just severity in that 40-minute period. We need to be very careful about that. These kids were seen by different examiners at various times, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 14. who did not know anything about the kids other than their age. So they were blinded to how the child had done in the past. And then they were given the ADOS, and out of that came a score from 1 to 10. What we were really surprised by and a little bit disappointed was that on the right, you'll see two groups of kids. A group of kids on the bottom right with very high scores, and another group of kids on the top right with not as high but very consistent scores. These accounted for 80% of the sample, had scores within 2 points from the time they were 2 to the time they were 14. So on the whole, the severity of autistic symptoms, again, in this 40-minute period during the ADOS, was very stable for most of the kids. And we were really surprised because these were kids identified at 2. I mean, you'll see they were practically babies. But in fact, that did not change very much for most of the kids. Most of the kids who were very autistic at 2 were still very autistic at 14. They might be quite different, but it didn't go away. And at the time we did this study, we were really hoping that many, many kids would be very variable. We did, on the other hand, in the top left, have a group of kids, just about 10%, who were either quite variable or whose scores got slightly worse. And you'll see they were kids who were actually milder than the other kids. These were pretty bright kids, verbal kids, who looked quite mild when they were tiny and looked more severe as they got older. And then we had a group of kids, about 10%, where the scores went down, who really changed quite remarkably. Okay. I'm going to show you just some clips. These are from ADOSs. So there is an examiner, a psychologist, and then one of the child's parents with them. And just to give you a sense of what these kids were like. So this is a little guy who's called Quinny. We met him at 19 months. And at 19 months, I thought he was one of the most autistic kids I had ever seen. He was absolutely aloof, cute as could be, but very uninterested in people. He was being raised primarily by his grandmother. His mother lived actually a few doors down. She had many children, and in fact, you'll see her, I think, in this tape with a baby behind him. So she did see him all the time, but primarily his grandparents were taking care of him. Here, you'll see the examiner trying to get him to look across the room at something, to share joint attention. Okay, And I think what you can't hear is the examiner is saying, look, look. And she's turning her head and trying to get him to look across the room. Here she goes.
Look, DeQuinn. Hey, DeQuinn. Look. Look at that bunny. Look at that. Look.
Now, when the bunny goes off, he looks. So he can shift his attention. It's not that he's unable to do it. It's that people getting him to shift his attention don't mean anything to him. And then you'll see, with most kids, when they get the bunny, they wonder, how do I make it go again? And then they realize that somebody can help them. And in fact, he looks at Pam, but he still keeps trying to shake this bunny into jumping up and down. So this little guy, at 19 months, had no language that we could tell of. He had pretty good nonverbal skills. His grandmother, who wonderfully brought him to the clinic because someone had said you should get help, felt like the only thing he didn't do was talk. But in fact, there were many, many things he didn't do because he really didn't approach people. He was so cute, people approached him, but he didn't initiate it. He started school at 2, he started therapy. At 3, he started school. And I just want you to see him at 9. He found this baby doll in one of our kits. He has a baby sister, and he found this, and he was so excited. And then what I want you to do is see what happens. Oh, sorry, I'm not supposed to do this. Okay, start the video. See what happens when she calls his name, gets him to look.
Look. Look.
And so by 9, he absolutely could do this. There's a car in the back. And then what's really cute is he's pretending it's a phone.
Drive it? Can you drive the car?
So at 9, he could speak in short sentences. He was much more socially directed. So even though as a tiny child, he had been very aloof, at 9, he really cared what people thought. He could not speak very well, but he did talk to communicate. And here he is at 20. This is our attempt to have something sort of like the bunny for an adult. It's sort of silly, and what we expect is the kids to look at us like, why are you shooting this thing indoors? What do you want? And what he is doing is being very sweet about this.
Should we do it again? Okay. Ready? Set?
Go.
Go!
So he is really giving her the benefit of the doubt, this lady who's shooting toys around the room.
Oh, that one went really far.
But he actually keeps the task going. So not only does he sit there passively, but he is doing things.
Oh, you want to pull it? Okay, pull it.
What's important about this is that actually at 20, he was doing very well in terms of his situation. He still lived with his grandparents. He had a part-time job at a bakery down the street. He is very neat. He likes things just so. And his grandparents have just done a phenomenal job of getting him to learn to do things that he likes to do. So when we visited him, we put a glass down to rest on a coaster. He would come get it and put it in the dishwasher.
Oh, look at it go.
He had just learned to change sheets on a bed. And in fact, the biggest problem was he wanted to change the sheets every day because he thought it was so fun to get the sheets and get them off the bed, put them in the washing machine, get new sheets. And his grandmother had made a chart showing him you could only do sheets once a week. So in his particular situation, he was doing very well, although he's talking less at 20 than he did at 9. And I think part of it is, I think he just doesn't think it's worth it. He doesn't have that much to say, and his grandparents are not big talkers. But in his situation, doing well, but clearly not totally independent, even though his grandparents have done an amazing job. This is another little guy who you'll see at 25 months, you can see. And here's his dad behind him. He's saying bubble. He was much more friendly, much more interested in people, had some lovely gestures and vocalizations, and very invested parents. Okay. And just to show you another clip, here he is. This is at 25. We're trying again to do some kind of task that's appropriate to adults. So you'll see just quickly, we're doing a clapping game. He is now very shy. He does not want to look at her.
All right. You might like this next time.
But again, what we don't need to run the video, but just, what I wanted you to know about him, he is also a boy who we really thought would learn to talk. He did not. So he hardly talks at all. But again, what he does is quite amazing. So his father passed away recently. He lives with his mother, and he really takes care of his mother. He cooks, she works, He cooks, he runs the household, he can make lists, even though he doesn't talk, of things that they need. He's like a stock, checking the stock of their kitchen, can do many, many independent things. And I think our reaction visiting him was, should he be out of the house more? Shouldn't he have a job? But I think he is actually very happy, and his mother is very happy with him living at home. So I think we have to decide for individuals what makes the most sense. This little guy, let's run the video, is 23 months old, and not that different than either of the other boys. He's a little older. What you'll see here is he really wants to arrange the cars in a certain way. And Pam, the therapist, is deliberately messing them up. What's striking about him, if you think about it, isn't what he's doing so much as what he's not doing. So he never looks at Pam. His mom is right behind him. He never looks at his mother like, why is this person messing my cars up? He just keeps putting them back in a certain sideways position that he really liked. So we did not know what would happen. And I think part of what I'm trying to show you is at very young ages, the kids are not nearly as different from each other as they are later. And that what separates them is not what they're like at 2, so much as the trajectory from 2 into the other ages. There.
Oh, just gotta stay far.
So he is just very determined to put those cars back, but to do it himself. And most kids would involve the other person and their parent. He is one of our success stories. So he is a kid who started talking by the time he was 3. He still had autism, actually, in the later years of high school. He also actually has a brother with autism who is less able than he is. But even when we saw him at 14, we thought he still had autism. At 19, we really wondered. He went to university. He actually got a master's degree in business. And here he is at age 24. And we really feel like if we met him today, we would not know that he was that little guy putting cars in sideways. Okay, sorry, can you start the video?
Do you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend?
Yes, a girlfriend.
Okay.
So she's just asked him if he has a girlfriend.
Paige.
Her name is Paige.
And how old is she?
She's 23.
Okay.
23.
When did you last see her?
Last night.
Okay.
When did you see her? Last night.
She's a very cliche Texas woman.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's a Texas
she's very
woman.
proud of that. She's very prideful of being a Texan.
Like bigger is better.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I don't know, she's really funny. She's kind. So.
Great. What do you guys like to do together?
Let's see shows together. Kind of explore Texas too.
Well, there's a lot to it.
So what I want you to see is there are kids who do move out of the spectrum. It's not the most common situation, but it does happen. And I think it happens more often than we think in research, because in research, often we study clinical populations who are coming to the clinic. He's not going to a clinic anymore. He's doing okay. And his mother just told me a couple of weeks ago that she thinks he and Paige are getting married. So he's really accomplishing the things that are hardest for people with autism. But that doesn't happen to everybody. And in fact, his younger brother also did learn to speak, but is much less independent. Now, what I want you to see here with these lines is that these are scores for expressive language. And the point is that the thickest line is the biggest group of kids. And the point here is that their language is growing linearly. There's a straight line from where they start, which is actually around 2, up to age 19, and very slow. So you see that there's a significant group of kids who really begin to speak some, but are still at about a 2-year-old level. There are also, though, many other trajectories. So if you look at the lines, if you go from the top right and go backwards from the kids who are doing the best at 19, which means really at age level, so you find that solid line up there and go down, you'll see that to get there, you have to have very rapid increases early on if you're going to catch up. And that, in fact, we have the majority of the kids that we have who are verbally fluent had very big increases in speech between 2 and 3. There's another group that we called late bloomers, and those are kids who had slightly later increases. So they're, let's see, if you count down from the top, they're the third line down from the top, also full. So that did happen, but most of the progress in language after at age 5 is linear, which means it's slow. We don't have the miracles that we see sometimes between 2 and 3 and sometimes later. And I think what's important there is that is a different course over time than other skills. So for social skills, these 3 lines represent, the bottom line is kids with severe intellectual disabilities, the middle line is kids who had normal intelligence but are not independent at age 19, and the top line are kids like Timmy, the last guy you saw, who've made these miraculous gains. The point here is everybody is gaining social skills, but it's much slower, and there aren't those shoot-ups that you have to have early on. The kids who are doing better tend to start a little bit better, and the difference between the kids who are independent and not independent really isn't clear until you get into school age. Even probably more important are changes in adaptive skills. These are abilities like being able to dress yourself, or being able to run an errand a block away, or be able to stay in a room by yourself, or a house by yourself, or make decisions about when you need a haircut. Those skills in our group tended to develop later, but become very, very important in school age. And though they're related to IQ and language level, what I wanted to show you here is with the yellow line, there is incredible overlap. We have kids like the 2 young men I showed you who have very good adaptive skills, even though cognitively they are quite limited. And then we also have people who are very smart who do not have good adaptive skills, still have their mothers getting in the shower with them, or still could not make a sandwich without making a big event. And I think we probably know people like this even without autism. So the point is, this is something we can do a lot about. This is something that we can change, both for kids who are not speaking very fluently and look like they're quite delayed. They can learn so much, and also people that have a lot of cognitive ability but may have missed out in how to take care of themselves. Just quickly to wrap up, I think these are things that other speakers will talk about. We need to remember that most kids who have autism don't just have autism. They have other things as well. And these may be medical problems, they may be language delay, they can be all sorts of things. I think just to summarize my main points, language, if language is going to be fluent, it has to happen early on. There are some very rare exceptions, but the focus for these young kids that we want to get in early has got to be communication and language. On the other hand, other skills tend to develop more slowly. And it's not that we're going to stop working on language at early ages, but that it's a different thing. It's not hoping for fluency. Other skills are more steady, and we need to not neglect them, and those can continue to improve into adulthood. And then a final thing, which I haven't said before, is in this study, the biggest effect of treatment were kids whose parents found a professional, any discipline, could be psychologist, speech therapist, OT, who they worked with steadily the year after diagnosis. We don't know, this is not a randomized controlled trial, so this may just be that the kids whose parents did that were more involved and more capable. Or they found somebody they stuck with, because if they bounced from profession to profession, this did not work. But that was more important than anything else that we can see in terms of treatment. I think we can think of autism in terms of the idea that there is a tree, and you're going up the tree and going down different limbs. And different things make differences if you are very verbal, if you are learning some language, but very slowly if you are not. And factors like irritability, adaptive skills, connectedness with peers, if you are verbal, can make a big difference. And then I think we can predict to some degree what is ahead, although we certainly want to be careful with individual kids. I think we can do a much better job picking what we're going to intervene about and not just do standard lists for everybody across all times. Kids who are 8 years old should have different goals than kids who are 2. And kids who are 14, the same thing. And I think we can do a better job of saying, look, we don't need to work on this. This tends to go away. This is a focus. I think that in this study, finally, I think we have a message of hope, because on the whole, the outcomes of the people that we've studied, these 200 kids, are better than what you get in most research. And again, I think part of it may be just these parents, that they were families that 20 years ago brought their kids to get a diagnosis at 2. But partly this is no longer a clinical sample. We didn't get it from a hospital. We got it from being 2, and we've just hounded these poor families since then so that we've stayed in touch with them. And many of them are doing well, not everybody, and I think that's important to recognize. And finally, that we want to remember that these kids aren't just a pile of weaknesses, they have strengths. And something like a sense of humor, even being clean and wanting to clean up, are really important factors. Attention to detail, the fact that someone is predictable and shows up to work and likes to work, the fact that these kids cared about their families, all make a big difference. So in the end, I just want to thank you for listening to me. We need to thank these families who have stuck with us for 20 years, and also many, many different researchers who worked with me. So thank you very much.